Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with your Monday Night Football preview for tonight's Eagles versus Seahawks game. Gonna go through all the things you need to know for DFS and a few props you can take over there on Underdog and Prize Picks to try and get some exposure for yourself. We've got some injury news, some weather in the forecast, and a few things to consider when going out there and building your GPP lineups. So a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with a look at the Draftkings Showdown side. And like I just hinted at, this is a slate where we've got a few moving parts, most notably Geno Smith, who is almost certainly not going to be playing tonight, which opens up playing time for Drew Lock. And based on how he looked last week against the 49ers, it wasn't that much of a downtick, right? Nearly put up 300 yards against them, had a few mistakes like any young quarterback would, but still respectable enough that tonight is going to be a relatively competitive game. And you see that with the spread that is just 3.5 points right now. But on the other side of things, we've got Jalen Hurts, who's a lot more likely to suit up, but is dealing with flu-like symptoms. They've said it's not actually the flu, but he's really under the radar. So you got to wonder how effective they're going to be, right? And whether they potentially maybe go a little bit more rushing heavy because of that illness. So with Jalen Hurts, I expect him to suit up. You can see he's still technically questionable as of right now. But because of that illness, I think guys like, DeAndre Swift get a little bit of a boost. And even the backup running backs like a Kenneth Gainwell, a Boston Scott, who's real cheap at $1,800, are all players that I think have a lot more upside tonight than really any other game in the year. So there are a few different ways you can look at the slate. I still think the ownership on Jalen Hurts is going to be through the roof. So if you were hoping that injury or illness narrative was going to keep people off of him, at least as of right now, right about 4 hours before lock exactly, I've got him at 76.2%, right, between the two spots there. So if you're going to get different tonight, if you're going to try and attack this kind of slate, you're going to have to think through, obviously the two injuries out there, but also the potential for some inclement weather. So as of right now, all the different forecasts for Lumen Field are over the place. You have some that are calling for constant rain pretty much the entire game, some models that are calling for just a passing shower, and it's like 1/100 of an inch of rain, so really nothing that's coming through over the 3-4 hours of the game. And then you have some models that are completely clear, right, that are calling for perfect weather tonight. So whether it's going to be clear, whether we're going to have a lot of rain out there, that's also going to have a huge impact on play. And honestly, based on some of the reports from meteorologists that we've seen on Twitter, a few of which, like Kevin Roth, for example, that specializes in the fantasy impact, has said that we can't really tell which model was actually going to be correct until like just before lock. So we'll talk through some of the different examples, but if it's completely clear, right, maybe Hurts can still throw the ball, right? Maybe he won't be as strong, right? Maybe doesn't have as much arm strength because of the illness, but is still able to throw the ball efficiently, especially to those intermediate routes. But if it's rainy out there, you've got a weak Jalen Hurts, you've got to think it's the DeAndre Swift, Gainwell, and Scott show, right? And on the flip side of things, if it's going to be completely clear, Drew Lock probably hitting a lot of DK Metcalf, Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. On the flip side, if it's rainy, it might be a little bit more, K9 out there, right? Kenneth Walker III, or potentially even Zach Charbonnet, who I think has earned a role even with K9 coming back. So the weather is going to play a huge impact. We're going to have to keep an eye on the news with Geno Smith. Maybe he does suit up after all. But all of these different moving parts just make the slate a little bit more tricky. It's going to trip up a lot of the competition. A lot of times projections don't account for some of the changes, or even when people do tinker with the projections, they don't make massive enough swings. So like, for example, right, let's go to an extreme here before we go player by player. If Jalen Hurts was to be rolled out tonight, which again, I don't expect that to be the case, people are going to jump the ship on A.J. Brown, right? They're going to jump ship on guys like a Devonta Smith. The ownership projections on them are going to be over-projected. You're going to see that around the industry. You're going to have people projecting them for probably still like 30, 35% a piece at flex. And you might only see them at 20, 25%. Whereas players like DeAndre Swift, right, I've got it 31% right now. If Jalen Hurts was rolled out, right, he's going to be 50, 60% out. Like, he's going to be probably your highest owned player on the slate. Marcus Mariota, of course, right, he's going to be a relatively high owned player as a value quarterback. If that happens, usually the industry isn't very keen on getting those changes right. So thinking through some of these scenarios ahead of time, potentially even having different sets of ownership projections, right, to account for different sets of news is how you have to walk into this kind of slate. And honestly, it's how I'm doing it, right? As of right now, I've got this set up with Jalen Hurts projected in. I already have a set of projections made just in case we don't see Hurts tonight, right? In case it is a Marcus Mariota that's starting, because not only do you have the position changes, the personnel changes, right, that are going on out there, you also have to deal with the salary allocation, right? With Jalen Hurts at 11-4, 17-1 at the captain spot, that's eating up on average about $10,000 of salary in every single lineup. Whereas a Marcus Mariota, right, is way, way cheaper. I mean, it's not even close when it comes to the salary, right? You're talking about a nearly $6K discount at the flex, nearly, I guess, $8.5K difference when it comes to their captain price. All of that has an impact on the distribution of ownership, right? And if guys like Swift are going to be a lot more popular, that means you're going to see a lot of people playing DK Metcalf. Like, he's artificially going to see an increase in ownership. All of these scenarios are things that you have to consider before lock, right? Because we're not going to get that Hurts news until probably closer to the game. Again, I'm expecting him to play, but if he is rolled out, all hell is going to break loose. And with the weather situation, right, I don't have a second set of projections made, but if it's going to be rainy, I'm calling for it to be like spotty showers right now. I don't think it's going to impact play all that much. But if it's a more significant forecast that comes through, DeAndre Swift's projection is going to go up, right? Probably going to be at least 14.5 points. Players, we already mentioned Gainwell, Scott, right? They're going to see significant usage and snap upticks. So you're probably going to see them go up, maybe even 1.5, 2 points out there. The industry usually doesn't account for that enough. So if you're looking for an edge tonight, be somebody that's willing to change your strategy last second, right? A lot of times we talk about my quote unquote favorite plays on the slate, and we spend a lot of time on that. This isn't a slate for that. We don't even know what the best plays are going to be because we don't have the weather, we don't have that quarterback situation nailed down. So just be willing to adjust, have a plan ahead of time on how you want to attack it, and that's my best recommendation for GPPs tonight. In terms of a few favorite plays, we'll talk about some of the scenarios where certain players would be better, right? We already talked about Swift in that rainy environment, probably getting a huge boost. But on top of that, if it's dry, right, I love a Devonta Smith. Has been extremely involved in the offense, has a great matchup against some of the secondary corners out there for the Eagles. You already don't have Darius Slay, which means Ringo is going to be going against A.J. Brown for much of the action, which leaves Devonta Smith going against backup cornerbacks, right? I mean, if he's going to be in the slot, right, going against maybe even a safety out there, he's going to have a plus matchup all night. So I like Devonta Smith if it's a little bit drier. He's also a player that relies on separation and getting open, which when it's rainy and you don't have a completely perfect field out there, it's hard for players like a Devonta Smith, Tyler Lockett to get his open, right? Both of those players are extremely reliant on their agility to get open, to create that space. Whereas a DK Metcalf, if it's a little bit rainy, can use his size to body wide receivers, right? When you're pushing other players using that physicality, it has a larger effect when it's going to be rainy out there. And it's not to say that he's completely impervious to that effect, right? Obviously, he'd want perfect conditions 10 out of 10 times out there. It's just that players like, that need to get open, right? Those slot type of wide receivers that need that separation, they're affected just a little bit more. So the drier the game, the more like those kind of players. The wetter the game, the better, Dallas Goedert, right, is going to be in those sort of scripts. He's a shorter ADOT player, which will help with Jalen Hurts maybe being a little bit banged up, right? Not to 100% strength with the illness. And on top of that, he's a player that doesn't rely on that quick, agility to go out there and get open. He's a big-bodied tight end, right? Kind of speaks for itself out there. If it's rainy, I like Goddard. I like, a Noah Fant, the backup tight ends for the Seahawks. You could go to a Parkinson, a Disley down there at $200. Are all players that I think see a huge benefit out there. Julio Jones, another big-bodied wide receiver, potentially a little bit more valuable in a rainy script. You could say the same thing about Olamide Zaccheaus too, right? Another big-bodied guy that likes making plays down the field. So we're going to have to react to some of that news late, right, to see which sort of plays make the most sense. On top of that, the defenses, right, Eagles, also the Seahawks defense are a potential move if it's going to be a little bit nasty out there. And you can see right now, I've got the Eagles at 20% ownership. We've got the Seahawks at right around 12% combined ownership. That's low, right? If it's going to be super nasty out there, undoubtedly people are going to flock to this Eagles and Seahawks in terms of the defenses, but it's not going to be like 40, maybe 45% that we've seen on defenses over the last month, right? When we've had those 7.5, 10-point spreads, you've seen people flock to these defenses, and that's normally the spot to stay away, right? When these, defenses are getting a little bit too chalky. But tonight, when they're sub 20%, that's a perfect spot to go out there and play a few defenses. So whether you're playing them in the perfect script, which I still think they're both viable, even if it's not super rainy tonight, but if we do get that forecast that's a little bit worse, these are the kind of plays that you're going to have to consider. If it's rainy, the kickers probably aren't looking as good. But again, if it's not going to be rainy, they're calling for next to no wind tonight, which probably makes these two kickers a solid play. In terms of punt plays, we went through the backup tight ends. Jake Bobo, number 4 wide receiver for the Seahawks, isn't the worst option out there. And even a Quez Watkins, who I think is a little bit better if it's going to be dry out there. He's a down-the-field speed type of wide receiver that definitely benefits, right, from the game being a little bit less sloppy. So $800, he's even a potential option that you can get to in GPPs. But once again, it's hard to really tell you, right, where to go with a lot of your lineups because we don't have that script out there. I will say in general that in terms of stacking one team or the other, that I'm looking at a lot of 4-2s in either direction. And if I'm trying to get different, especially in my large field GPP exposure, it's going to be a lot of 4-2 Seahawks heavy stacks. It's going to be potentially taking, a K9 at the captain spot. A lot of Zach Charbonnet, right? 2 running back lineups potentially, because I do think that he's going to get involved out there. Whereas if I'm going to go with more of a Philly heavy stack, I'm trying to be creative about it, right? That's going to be the more chalky side, as a lot of you could imagine out there. Even if Jalen Hurts isn't in there, I still think a lot of people are going to, the spread will probably be close to a coin flip, I would imagine, if Jalen Hurts is taken out. Maybe even the Seahawks would be slight favorites in that kind of script. You're going to see a lot of 3-3s, right, if that ends up being the case. So as of right now, I think the chalky script is that 4-2 Eagles stack. But if you're a little bit creative about it, you can get the job done, right? Maybe it is using the Eagles defense out there, right? They're not as popular, so they're a way that you can slightly differentiate that. In terms of, a Zacchaeus or even a Julio Jones, both of those players are around 2.5%, total ownership. You take one of those players and you're more than different within that 4-2 chalky Eagles stack. So it's a lot to consider. I think it's going to be a fun slate, especially if you're somebody that's going to pay attention to that quarterback news and that weather news. And it's one to take advantage of, especially in large field contests. And now for some props. So first off, we got this DeAndre Swift over on rushing yards. He's currently minus 135 over this on Draftkings. On FanDuel, he's up at 60.5 yards. And a lot of this is due to the Hurts illness, right? I don't think he's going to be at 100% speed. I expect the Eagles to probably run the ball 5, maybe 10% more than usual. And they're already one of the rushing heavy teams in the NFL. And if Hurts is going to take on less of that load himself, you'd have to imagine if he's feeling weak, right? Not as physically strong, that the rushing game is probably the part that's the most affected, right? He's not going to have all that cardio. He's not going to be as strong of a runner, which is really his trademark out there at that position. That Swift, Gainwell, Scott, right? You could look at Gainwell and Scott overs on rushing yards too. I think all of them are direct beneficiaries. So I like the sportsbook line value that we're getting compared to DraftKings. A little bit of a discrepancy compared to some of the other large books. And on Pinnacle, he was minus 145 for the over. And they're looked at as one of the sharper books out there. For NFL, maybe not as much, but still, minus 145 odds. Nice little data point to have behind us out there, that 59.5 yards. And then the other prop we're taking on Underdog. So a lot of my exposure, just personally, is going to be waiting until before lock, right? I want to see that weather forecast. I want to see, make sure that Jalen Hurts is going to play. But with DK Metcalf, like I mentioned, even if it's a little bit rainy, he's slightly less affected than, let's say, Devonta Smith, a Tyler Lockett out there. So I took his over on receiving yards. Drew Lock likely to be the quarterback. I'm not as worried about his efficiency, though, right? He went out there, was really impressive against a 49ers defense, and now he's going against an Eagles secondary that's without Darius Slay, has a few injuries on the back end, too, at safety. A lot of young players that are suiting up for that Eagles side. DK Metcalf has the size advantage over every single one. He has the strength advantage over everyone on the football field, and then he can take the top off the defense. So I hope it's not as rainy tonight. I think the best case scenario for this slip in particular is that it, is on and off with the rain, right? DeAndre Swift gets a few more carries because it's a wet field. DK Metcalf maybe is able to body some of those cornerbacks with a slightly slick surface, right? We don't want it to be a complete slog, right, where there's like no passing. That wouldn't be great for DK Metcalf, but if it's just like a light little drizzle out there, I think that's the perfect scenario for us. So this over on both of these players is, also with DK Metcalf, I should say, he's minus 135 for the over. So we're getting some sportsbook value there too. And then over there on FanDuel, he's at 63.5 yards. So that's a 3-yard discrepancy. You also have that sportsbook juice going in our direction. So 2 overs that definitely has some value on Underdog. Over on the prize pick side, we do have Metcalf at the same projection, but unfortunately DeAndre Swift is 1 yard higher. And as of now, because we don't have the whole board for the Seahawks, it's hard to really find a ton of value to build around and build, 4 or 5 man slips. So I just have these 2 props for now. Again, I will be putting in a bulk of my exposure a little bit closer to lock when we have all that info. So as per usual, guys, if you want access to the DFS projections that you saw throughout the video, check out my Patreon page. They're all posted on there. And of course, for all the different prop exposure I'm taking closer to lock, I'll be posting that for my Patreons on there too. So make sure to check all of that out. But on prize picks, Metcalf's at that same projection, so I would certainly still get exposure there. Personally, I haven't gone to the DeAndre Swift side, so I'm kind of waiting for a pairing to go out there and attack that Metcalf value. But yeah, as of right now, probably stick over there to Underdog, right? Try and go after the best lines available. I know it's only a 1 yard difference, so if you're willing to chance that, go over there, still play it on prize picks. But in theory, right, if you're trying to grind out the best possible return on investment, you want to strictly take the best value available. So I don't really endorse going out there and playing it on prize picks, but if you insist, it's the only site legal in your state or the only book that you have available that you play yourself. I'm not against playing it. Let's just say that much. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Coming out a little bit later than I wanted to, just due to some errands I had to get done, some Christmas shopping right here before the holidays, but still wanted to bring you guys all the info you needed for tonight. So hopefully feel a little bit more prepared for that action. Best of luck with your DFS lineups, any props that you guys are getting to. Go ahead, smash that like button on the way out of here to go ahead, help get this video out there to more people, and also subscribe so you don't miss any of my content in the future. We'll have a Thursday night football preview coming out, obviously main slate content coming out for next week, so make sure to stay tuned to all of that out there, and let's go out there and have ourselves a Monday night. Appreciate it, guys. Best of luck out there, and I'll catch you guys for the content throughout the week.